Welcome to Transparency with Diana B., a podcast from wealthmanagement.com focused on advisors' personal well-being and healing. In this podcast, we explore some of the deepest struggles and hardships that many advisors face and bring these issues out into the open so that others may find healing. Join us for this journey where we explore ways to overcome the stresses and anxieties as Diana draws from years of expertise and guest experts to manage the personal challenges of advisors.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Transparency with Diana B., a podcast by wealthmanagement.com. My name is Diana Britton, and I'm the managing editor of wealthmanagement.com. For those of you who are new to the podcast, each episode focuses on a personal development issue facing financial advisors and financial services professionals. Guests join me to talk about their journey dealing with a struggle and how they found healing. My guest today is Justin Reckers. He's the lead advisor at Fonte Financial Advisors and also CEO of Wellspring Divorce Advisors in Carlsbad, California. Justin, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Diana. It's a pleasure.
So we often talk on this podcast about problems that are not particularly specific to the wealth management industry, illnesses, addiction, things like that. But one issue that is sort of more specific to advisors is having to disclose on your BrokerCheck events that aren't necessarily tied to working with clients, but, personal financial events. And so that's something that has happened to Justin. These things, they can sometimes carry a bad connotation, even if they don't speak to one's ability to manage money or provide financial advice. A lot of advisors are forced to disclose these things from their past and can kind of come back and haunt them. Justin, of course, has always been transparent on his U4 about his troubles, which included a short sale on a home by his former wife, an employment separation, and tax liens. But, despite the disclosures, those things hurt his career a bit and, brought him to the brink of bankruptcy. But it all started with this short sale on his former home and something that he really didn't have anything to do with and had no control over. So tell me a little bit about the events that, led up to your money problems.
Sure. Yeah. I was a young man in love while in college and got engaged before I had actually graduated. My fiance at the time was a year ahead of me in school. And was able to essentially get a transfer through her employer at the time to move to Southern California, which is where she was originally from and much of her family had lived. So I do thank her for having brought me to Southern California from much colder Columbus, Ohio. But so we got
very
engaged
better place
before.
To be. Much better
Absolutely.
place to be.
And I'm happy to still be here, in fact. So we decided we were going to move to Southern California, and I was interning at a multi-billion-dollar RIA at the time while I was finishing up my college degree, but decided, regardless of what happened with the potential job opportunity there, I was going to move to California with my fiance. So we actually bought a house in Southern California out in what we call the Temecula Valley area. This is circa 2003. And that was actually before I had finished my bachelor's degree. We purchased our first home. If anybody knows Temecula Valley, at that time, we bought there because it was the only place we could afford. It was the high-flying days of the California real estate market. And so I put myself in a situation where I lived very far away from any potential job opportunity I had relative to being a financial advisor in Southern California. And we lived there 2.5 years or so. And then decided, it's time to buy a bigger house. Got caught up in the times relative to buying bigger houses and thinking you're going to continue to make money off of the home that you purchase. And I was 23, 24 years old at the time. So got caught up in that, bought a second house with her. And after we bought our second place, we separated about 6 months after that. So I had already started at that stage in my career specializing in divorces. And of course, this was the first one I was going to go through myself. And I will say, in the end of all this, I think the most important thing for anybody to take away from my talking to you today is that you always got to try and take your own advice, because the biggest thing I didn't do was take my own advice throughout many of these things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard though.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
when you're in the situation, it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. It's trying to separate in a amicable manner and facilitate the things that she wanted at the time when we separated, which is that she wanted to keep that home that we had purchased. And for me to be able to have a better lifestyle, I needed to move south into San Diego, I was driving an hour and a half each way from my home with her to my office in Del Mar down in San Diego County for the couple of years that I was doing it. And I totaled
And you actually
automobiles.
Yeah, you got into a couple car accidents.
Yeah, back in those days, the traffic was nasty. I was driving an hour and a half each way. Both of those automobile accidents were sandwich accidents, so there were 4 or 5 cars involved each time, and turned into neck injury that I still have today as well. And yeah, I mean, the first thing that I ever ran into relative to my professional career was a result of that relationship, that breakup, and that she did keep the house. We agreed that she was going to hold me harmless from the mortgage debt associated with it and any other expenses for that matter. I knew at the time already that when you go through divorces, you can say you hold someone harmless from a debt that would otherwise be considered marital or community. I knew that from my business, but that even if you say that in a legal document, the lenders don't care. If your name's on the document, on the borrowing document, the deed of trust, whatever the situation is, you're still going to be liable for it in the lender's eyes.
That's good to know.
Yeah. So, 4 or 5 years after we separated, she ended up short selling the house in 2011, I think it was, which was when I got my first disclosure on my record. And I had nothing that I could do about it. I mean, I wasn't in a situation where I could write a $300,000 check to pay the difference between what she owed on the house and what it could actually sell for. So it turned into a short sale, which back in those days was pretty common. We even had federal laws put on the books in the Bush administration to take what otherwise would have been taxable income via the forgiveness of debt and basically forgive at least the tax liability associated with it to help people in the real estate crisis back then.
Yeah.
So she did what you call cash for keys, and the mortgage lender basically gave her a check in exchange for her leaving peacefully and not ripping copper pipes out of the walls, which is what people were doing back then.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, it's a shame that something like that has to go on your record, for the public to see.
Yeah, I believe it's on my record for 10 years, although officially anything on BrokerCheck, I believe, never goes away. But in terms of me having to disclose it, I believe I have 10 years in terms of how long I have to do it.
Yeah. And so what happened after your first divorce? I know you were still working for the firm in San Diego, kind of trying to be a partner there. What happened next?
Yeah, so I have kind of one of those fairly common stories that you would hear talked about by relatively young advisors, in that I started my career at a place where I was essentially an eat what you kill advisor, and so I got a percentage of my revenue that I produced. And while I was there, I started my divorce business, which I bill hourly for my time and work specifically with people during divorces. No investment management or anything like that involved in it, but started a separate business entity, which became very successful. And we ended up creating a separate business entity to basically run that business through, so it wasn't through the existing RIA at that time. I started there in 2004, I want to say. Yeah, so probably like spring of 2004. And as I said, did really well. I eventually I pivoted the divorce practice into something that was just designed to be an hourly billing model, like a lot of people are doing these days, into something that also was a prospecting tool. In other words, I was starting my wealth management side of the business, and a lot of my clients ended up in the divorce business becoming my wealth management clients as well, because you build a relationship with someone, you help them through the hardest time of their lives, going through a divorce, the biggest financial transaction of most lives as well. They learn to trust you, and ultimately, they want to continue working with you. So came to realize that pretty quickly. So I came to realize that pretty quickly, and was was able to start my wealth management practice really off of the back of my hourly divorce business that we had created as well. I was there from '04 until probably 2013 before I started getting a little disenfranchised by the situation with the business. And when I say it's kind of a standard story, it was, two older partners, two men who had been in partnership with each other for probably 20 years by the time I joined. And they were kind of on the downswing, I guess you would say, of their careers. They weren't actively trying to bring in new clients. They were happy with what they had. And I was getting the itch to become a partner at that point,
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, especially since you were involved in a lot of growth at the firm, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the time that I started getting the itch, as I said, I was probably 90% of all of the new business for the firm, and plus the divorce business revenue, which was separate but still part of the bigger picture. And I got to the point where I, again, like a lot of people, say to themselves, well, where is my future going to go with this business? So I started telling them, here's some things that I think would be better for the business, better for the clients, better for productivity, for profitability, so on and so forth, putting in my 2 cents. And for the most part, it really didn't get anywhere. It was more of a thanks for your opinion. We'll think about it. And a lot of it just really didn't sink in and end up being able to change the business. And then I also eventually got to the point where I said, look, I'm a big enough part of this business at this point. I really think I deserve to be given an opportunity to become a partner. And that I won't say that the existing partners at the time were averse to that. I think they were not quite sure how to do it, and by extension averse to it because they thought it was going to cause them tax consequences. They were going to lose control, whatever the reasons are that the older partners have across firms all over the country. But in the end, I did get to a point where I said, I need to be a partner or I'm going to have to leave. And their response effectively was, we'll give you what's called a profits interest in the company, which was not what I was looking for. And I'll explain it to anybody who doesn't know. When you're offered a profits interest partnership, it essentially means that you have an interest in the company only to the extent that it grows from the level at which you become a profits interest partner. And for me, as I said, I was already creating 90% of the growth in the company as it was. So to myself, I'm saying, well, why would I take on the added risk associated with it with very little expectation of additional income or gain out of it other than the income and gain that I personally create,
Yeah. And so I know, sort of during this time when you were sort of growing that firm and starting the divorce franchise business, you got married a second time and had 2 kids, kind of fast forward. And so what happened with that marriage?
Yeah, so my first wife and I divorced in 2007. I got remarried in February of 2009. So roughly 18 months between divorce and remarriage. My second wife was actually administrative assistant at the firm that I worked at that I was just talking about. No funny business, just so you know, no funny business while we were working together. But she basically told me the first time that we had a date, she's like, I always respected the way you talked about your ex-wife, even when you were going through the divorce process, like never spoke badly about her. And it is what it is. Like, move on, be amicable, be good people. Right. So always trying to take the higher road. So we start dating shortly after my first divorce and get married relatively quickly. We'll say part of that was because I really wanted to have children of my own. And, even though I don't have the biological clock that women do per se, I was like, this is something I want to do. And this is a woman that I can see doing it with. So we got married again, probably less than 18 months after I got divorced the first time. And we bought a house within 3-4 months of getting married. 5 months after we got divorced, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis.
Oh gosh.
9 months, I should say, after I was diagnosed with MS, we had our first child. So we went really quick. And, that at the time I didn't think anything about it. Like, why would I take my time at this point? I know what I want. I know this is someone I want to be with. I know I want to have kids. I'm doing well in business. Why take it slow? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
So we did everything really quickly. And so my first child was born in June of 2010. So 14 months after we got married? And 11 months after I was diagnosed with MS. We actually did go through the process of deciding whether we should still have kids after I was diagnosed with MS, because you do have a hereditary predisposition to the disease. Yeah.
Right.
Decided to not let it hold us back and went for it. And so now I have 2 kids. So they're now 5th grade, 3rd grade, 10 and 8, doing great. They're awesome kids with my now second ex-wife. So she and I went through quite a lot relative to our breakup, which started in 2013, so September of 2013. That was right around the time I mentioned before, where I was also considering what is my professional future. Where was I going to go with my then business partners who were kind of not willing to make me a full partner? And do I go out on my own? Do I find some other opportunity to partner with somebody else? So I had a lot going on, I would say, at that point.
Yeah, you were kind of at a fork in the road in a lot of ways.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I mean, I know that what happened sort of with the settlement agreement with your second ex-wife, and how did that kind of affect your finances?
Yeah, very, very long portion of the conversation. So as I mentioned, we separated in 2013. We did try and reconcile once for the benefit of the kids and stuff. So we officially separated in January of 2014 after our reconciliation attempt failed. Lots of stuff mentally, emotionally happening for her at the time that really just didn't make it possible for us to get to that reconciliation. We tried very hard, but there was some addiction problems, some mental, emotional problems that I'm happy to say these days have been worked out for her. But at the time, it was a mountain that we could not summit, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
we officially went down the path of getting the divorce done, and we're officially divorced in April or May of 2014. As I said, I'm in the divorce business, so I basically put together a settlement proposal for her, one that I thought was not just very fair, but also very generous to her. My goals for it were to basically live up to the promises that I had made while we were married to some extent, in that we had agreed she would be a stay-at-home mother to our 2 children, at least until my youngest got to 1st grade, who at the time we separated was 1 year old. So my settlement proposal to her was that I pay her what we call a non-modifiable amount of spousal support or alimony, which means that regardless of whether one of us wants to change the dollar amount or the duration or anything like that, the court doesn't even have the jurisdiction to make the change. And I structured it in a way that she had what I perceived to be enough money to keep the home that we owned, be able to afford it, pay her basic living expenses, and pay for the basic living expenses for my kids until my daughter got to 1st grade, who again was 1 at the time. So I proposed to her that I pay roughly $85,000 a year in non-modifiable alimony. So it works out to $7,150 a month ish, which was enough to cover what she needed for sure. And she agreed to it. She took it to an attorney for an opinion and whatnot, and the attorney endorsed it, and she agreed to it. So we were able to, despite the problems that we had while married and when we were originally separating, we were able to get our divorce settlement done relatively easily. Certainly there was plenty of drama in between, which I'm not going to talk about with you today, but there was plenty of drama in between, but we got through it. We ultimately amicably separated things. I arranged the situation also that she got to keep the house that we owned together so that my kids could stay there. And then she got that amount of alimony spousal support that I mentioned. And it was for roughly 5 years. And we were only married for 4.5 years. So, typically in California, you pay alimony for, if you're married that long, for about half the length of your marriage. So I could have been off the hook in 2.5 years, but I wanted to be simultaneously generous as well as take care of my children. That was my most important thing.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I want to get to how you kind of got through these hard times, but let's skip ahead a little bit. I know you went to another firm, and became, you joined another firm as a partner, another divorce practice, and we don't have to name names or anything, but you kind of had a falling out with that partner, and what happened after that? I know that you kind of got to a point where you were on the brink of bankruptcy almost. So how did you get to that point?
Yeah, so start with the conversation of not being happy with the business that I was in back in 2013, 2014. So 2014, I started having serious conversations with a colleague that had become not just a great colleague, but also a great friend of mine over the years. And we were in the same circles in terms of our niches and whatnot. And we saw each other pretty regularly, talked all the time about business, and saw each other regularly at conferences and stuff like that. So we started talking about, well, maybe we can, and literally one of the only other businesses in the United States that looked like mine, where there was a full-fledged, high quality divorce business doing forensic accounting, mediation, collaborative divorce, all that kind of stuff, along with having a mature wealth management business. So we started talking about, well, how can we do this on both coasts? Because she was on the East Coast and I was on the West Coast. How can we potentially partner up and merge these two businesses across the coasts? And so we agreed ultimately in 2014 to become partners. It kind of didn't really start off super smoothly relative to what my transition would look like. So we originally had been talking about me doing my jump from my existing firm to the new firm and becoming a partner with the advisor on the East Coast between October and December of 2014. There were some compliance operational issues that postponed it. I kind of got to the point, February really of 2015, where I said to myself, I got to do this or it's not going to happen. So I left in mid-March of 2015, my old firm. I rented an office space in San Diego. I hired 2 employees, an assistant financial planner and an operations administrative manager, and we opened the office. And the moment that I gave my resignation letter to my original firm, they did what I will simply call spilled blood in the streets. Sent emails to every single person on my centers of influence list, every one of my clients, effectively saying that I'm no longer involved in the operations or management or anything of the businesses that I was still, by the way, a partner in that hadn't been resolved yet, but spilled blood in the streets. My own attorney, in fact, got the email and sent it to me. He was the first person to send it to me saying, what's going on here? So it kind of, it made a big, pile of something in the streets relative to our attempt to amicably separate. These guys that I left, my previous partners, were not people I didn't like. In fact, one of them was like a father to me. So I wasn't leaving because I didn't like them. It was because I needed to go someplace to get what I wanted out of my career, and it wasn't available there. But still, they spilled the blood in the streets, which really negatively affected the divorce side of my business, which is all referral based. It's all family law attorneys and mental health professionals and stuff making referrals to me to help their clients. And once they see something like that, they're obviously a little bit less comfortable than they would have been a week or two before. So that really hurt me. I mean, I had to take a pay cut in the first place when I left the first firm to partner up in the second firm. And my first set of partners actually sued me too after I left. Oddly enough, not for the wealth management business, but for my licensing business, which you just basically mentioned earlier before, but because I was licensing my intellectual property from my divorce practice to other financial advisors around the country. And the 2 gentlemen I was with initially were partners in that business, and we did a legitimate transfer of the intellectual property from our local 3-member LLC to a national business that was basically licensed to sell franchises across the entire country. So it was a legitimate transfer that they signed on both sides of, but they sued me and accused me of fraudulent transfer of intellectual property from that transaction. They did make an attempt to go after some of my wealth management business, but I wouldn't say it was any sort of like massive, 15 people making phone calls to my clients kind of thing. Yeah. So it wasn't a big thing on that side, but they did sue me and I had to defend myself from it. So I'm in the midst of trying to start up a new business partnership while having to defend myself from a lawsuit, spending tens of thousands of dollars on my legal fees to defend myself from it. We did ultimately go to mediation to settle that, so it didn't have to get litigated, thankfully. But in the end, it was, I leave for a reason. They get upset about it. I start a new partnership. They continue to effectively potentially damage my ability to do business as I want to. During that time, this was, call it March to October of 2015, I'm trying to get my business up and running with my new partner. And we've got the new office open that I mentioned. I actually had to have my 2 employees work from my apartment for 2 months because when I left in March, our office lease wasn't in place yet. So they worked in my tiny apartment with me for 2 months, and I had to drive to every client to get them to sign paperwork to hire the new firm and such. But we eventually got into the new space, and it was around my birthday, so around mid-April of 2015. We're in the new space. Everybody's happy. Everybody's good. And I get to the point then where I'm defending myself from this lawsuit. I've lost most, if not all, of my revenue from the divorce business, which was about $10,000 a month that I lost just from that.
Wow.
So I'm essentially taking a $7,500 a month paycheck from the wealth management business, and my alimony obligation is which is $7,150. So I've got $350 a month worth of basically money that I can use to support my own expenses.
Yeah.
So, obviously, fast forward to that, I'm in a position where I'm on the verge of bankruptcy. I liquidated my entire 401k balances. I sold everything I had of value to be able to just pay basic bills. The most important thing to me, though, is that no matter what, I pay my alimony obligation because that's for my kids, which I did.
Yeah,
I was able to continue to do that. It was not easy, but
yeah, and so that meant that you weren't able to pay your taxes for a couple of years, right? By prioritizing the alimony. Those are now on your record as well, and I know you're almost done, paying that back.
Yeah, the taxes go back
ahead.
further than that. Yeah, the taxes go back even further than that, though. We ended up getting audited for the last 2 years that I was actually married to my second wife. And of course, we were separated at the time, so I didn't get access to the records I needed to defend myself from said audit. So we had tens of thousands of dollars worth of additional taxes levied by the audit, which I had to take on and pay the entirety of. And then, I prioritized paying for my kids over paying my income taxes during the couple of years. 2015 for sure, 2016 and part of 2017. In order to meet my obligation to my family, I said, well, the only way I can do it is to not pay taxes. And of course, still, I got to pay the taxes, and I'm going to, but then it results in penalties and interest and also disclosures, as you mentioned. So I have tax lien disclosures as well. And to the outside world, you look at my BrokerCheck and you see tax liens and a default on debt and stuff. And if you don't ask for an explanation as to where those came from, you think that maybe I'm not the greatest guy, right?
Yeah, and they don't really provide much room for explanation, right?
No, it's even smaller than a Twitter tweet.
Yeah, right. So, what kind of got you through these tough times? I know you've sort of come back from it a bit. You've gone out on your own. You started your new firm with Fonte, and you've built up your book from, I know you started with 12 million and now you're at, you said about 98 million under management, which is great. And so I'm just wondering, how did you sort of get through those tough times and build up your book of business and come back from that?
Yeah, so my second partner and I broke up basically in October of 2015. I started the new firm, Fonte Financial Advisors, as soon as I could. So we'll call it November 1st of 2015. I brought on a minority partner, basically to fund my startup costs back then. She was already my partner in our national licensing business. She had actually worked for me in my San Diego divorce business office for a couple years. sort of a career transitioner. She is a CPA, was an auditor though for a big accounting firm, and wanted to get into working with people instead of working with corporations. So she had come and work for me in my business in San Diego for about a year and a half before relocating back to where she came from, which was Denver. So she moved her family back to Denver. They actually still owned their house that they had there before they moved to San Diego. So easy transition. And I told her when she left, she was worried that when she left San Diego that I wasn't going to want to be in business with her anymore on the divorce side of things. I'm like, absolutely not. You're going to open an office for us in Denver when you get there. We're doing this licensing thing. We're spreading across the country. So of course she did. She opened an office in Denver of the divorce business, probably in late 2013, early 2014. So she was a little bit established there already by the time October, November of 2015 rolled around. And, I was faced in October of 2015 with the concept of, well, I either have to take a job working for somebody else and not be self-employed anymore, or I got to find somebody to partner with or somebody to bankroll the startup costs that I need, because I had literally zero cash and was maxed out on every credit card, every potential available debt that I could take on. So thankfully, my partner, Sandy, was willing to step in and help with those startup costs. And so she is now my partner in Fonte. So Fonte has 2 physical offices in San Diego as well as in Denver. So we expanded beyond the divorce practice in Denver and have an office of the wealth management business there now too. And she's my partner in our RIA that we're registering as we speak. In fact, we filed our RIA registration with the SEC last Friday. So in the next
Congratulations.
30 days or so. Yeah, thank you. So in the next 30 days or so, we'll be up and running with our own RIA. And yeah, as you said, when I first broke up with the second partner, I had $12 million under management. And I went to a company called Advisory Services Network, which was great, actually. They were basically outsourced compliance and operations for IARs. They're fully supportive of me leaving at this stage, doing everything they can to help. So great for anybody who finds themselves in a situation like me where they got to leave someplace, but they don't have a ton of assets, so they can't go directly to a custodian. Find somebody like Advisory Services Network to help out. But so as you said, we're pushing $100 million at this point in terms of assets under management. Most of it has been a direct result of our niche in divorces, working with people during divorces, and just the natural progression that they want to work with us after the fact too. And I'd say that probably,
niche.
We're at probably 80.
Not a
85%.
not a great life event, but
Right.
very, very lucrative for the wealth management industry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, obviously, as you follow my story, I was in that business before I actually got divorced myself, but my parents were divorced. My parents went through a nasty divorce, which is what got me ambitious about helping people through it. And, you fast forward through it, and now it's, I have true empathy because I've been through it myself. And, I don't think that people need to have empathy for others having been divorced like they've gone through it themselves to help people in divorces, but it literally is the biggest financial transaction of most people's lives. And unfortunately, the cliche still exists that most women in a marriage don't know where their money is, don't know how the money is earned, don't have control of the money. And a lot of our work is about leveling that playing field and giving them a sense of security and removing ambiguity and fear of the future to make them comfortable with being able to finalize their divorce. And in order to do that, you got to show them what the future looks like. So we're literally talking to them about their financial future before they are even close to getting divorced. And I think it gives a sense of security and connection and trust and whatnot that, is really hard to rival in any other sort of niche in the financial advisory world.
Yeah, well, I just think there's such a need for that. And I know that a lot of advisors out there have money problems like yourself. Everybody does, right? And it's just because you're a financial advisor doesn't mean that these things don't come up for you and kind of haunt you. So I'm just wondering, are there any lessons that you learned from these experiences? Things that you would tell other financial advisors who might be in the similar spot?
Yeah, sure. So, talk first about what effect it actually has on my business today. I will tell you, I have not ever had a single client or prospective client look at my BrokerCheck and ask me questions about why things are on there or how they got there or anything like that. So from that perspective, I don't think it has negatively affected my business. I will say that, yeah, it costs me a lot of time and money to be able to do such basic things as getting registered in a state that I'm trying to do business in, as well as to maintain my CFP designation. So I got my CFP before I got securities license. So a very important thing to me. I got my CFP in 2006. I went through one of the first bachelor's degree programs in the United States at a major university that fulfilled the requirement to take the CFP exam. I have spent probably 60 hours writing letters and putting together backup documentation for the CFP board to explain to them what all of this stuff is in my disclosures.
Yeah.
And they're not, no offense to the CFP board, but especially during COVID, they're not quick with things.
Yeah.
So a lot of this has gone on through COVID. So I'm sending them 75 or 100 pages worth of letters and documents to explain what's going on, waiting for their response. Takes 6 months or longer for them to fully respond to what I've sent them. So it's a lot of my time and it's money. And I have had a couple of states refuse to license me because of the things that are in my disclosures. Luckily, they're not the two states that I do most of my business in, but a couple of states have said no. I mean, if you have to show to us that you're solvent, which I do. That's not a problem. I am solvent, but you have to show us that all of these debt problems that you have are not going to affect your business because, of course, they're doing their jobs and protecting their citizens from somebody who potentially will do wrong by them, which I'm not, obviously. I just have had these problems in my past. So I've had to realize the fact that there are a couple of states that just plain don't want me to be licensed there and go through the hoops and go through the costs of applying for licenses and still having them denied, which, again, it's me, taking my penance for the mistakes that I made in the past, which I can't take away. But I would say that other than that, the time and the money associated with those things, I wouldn't say that it really has affected me long term as far as the success of my business. Yes, there were those couple of moments where people left because they thought, I moved twice in 6 months, lost $20 million worth of clients on the second move because they thought it looked not necessarily suspicious, but unstable, I guess, maybe. So there was certainly those hiccups. I'd have more AUM now than I do if those things hadn't happened. But again, we've grown from 12 million to almost 100 million in 5.5 years. So we're doing really well. Got no complaints about that. What I've learned from all of this stuff, as I said very early on, I think that the most important thing is that I wasn't taking my own advice for years, for a decade at least. I wasn't taking my own advice. I wasn't, committing myself to pay attention to my finances when I was married for the second time, to not overextending myself when I got divorced for the second time. I was doing it for what I thought were the right reasons, and I still think are the right reasons, trying to support my family and be generous and take the high road and all that stuff. But in the end, I honestly, I would have told a client of mine not to do that.
Yeah.
So I didn't take my own advice. Even if I encouraged a client to go down that path, I would have built in some sort of fail-safe so that in the event everything goes to hell, heck, whatever, you have a way out.
You can
of
curse
it,
on here. Yeah.
Okay, good. So you have a backdoor out of it at least, which I didn't do for myself. And, even the more basic things, like I'm a business owner. I haven't had a CPA that actually gives me tax advice for like 5 years. They prepare my tax returns, but they don't say, hey, Justin, if you make this change, you can pay less in taxes. Like simply setting myself up with a minimum level of income to appease the IRS from my business, paying the self-employment taxes and whatnot, and then everything over and above that, pay myself as a non-self-employment taxed income. No one told me to do that until I finally got to the point where I had the time to sit down and research it myself. I could have saved $20,000+ just last year if someone had told me that.
Yeah. Wow.
Just in self-employment taxes. And it's such a basic thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, Justin, we're just about out of time. I wish we could talk about this all day, but I'd like to thank you, Justin, for being on the podcast. And I know it was, it's hard to talk about some of these, really personal things and hard things that you went through. So I really appreciate you opening up about them.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And if you'd like to reach out to Justin, or if you have any questions for him, you can reach him at jreckers@fontefinancial.com, and we'll put this in the show notes below. If you yourself have a struggle and you wish to share your experiences and help others in similar situations, please feel free to reach out to me at transparencywithdianab@gmail.com. I'd like to thank you for listening to Transparency with Diana B. If you've not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This is Diana Britton reminding you that where there's healing, there is hope. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Transparency with Diana B podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of wealthmanagement.com. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional advice. Always seek the advice of your healthcare provider with any questions you have regarding your particular situation.